Hello and welcome to another video in the series Archaeology and Islam. My name is Dan Gibson, and if you have a question you would like to ask, you can email me at the address at the bottom of your screen, dan@canbooks.ca. This is the second video about the Kaabas. If you haven't seen the first video, please stop now and go back to YouTube and view that video. In the first video, I introduced a number of terms and concepts. In this video, I want to examine now the original Kaaba in Petra and compare it to the Kaaba in Mecca. Recently, I posted an academic paper on the internet called 4 Kaabas. You can read that paper at the sites listed on the screen, and there you will have all the footnotes and references. The first Kaaba was built by Abraham in a valley that had 2 names in Islamic literature. First, it's called Becca, the place where Abraham left Hagar and where she wept. The Quran tells us, "Behold, the first sanctuary appointed for mankind was that at Becca, a blessed place and a guidance to the people." The name of this place is also Hijr, and we read about this in Al-Tabri's account. Tabri, Volume 2, 73. Abraham directed Hagar and Ishmael to go to Al-Hijr, and he settled them there. In the film The Sacred City, I demonstrated that this all refers to the Petra Valley in southern Jordan, and all of the Qiblas from the first century of Islam all pointed to this valley. And all of the descriptions of this place, from the Quran and the Hadiths and the histories, all fit the Petra Valley. Now, the Kaaba was rebuilt when Muhammad was a young man. From the alignment of the Kaabas, we know that this took place in Petra. Mecca was not even a city at this point, and there was no archaeological data for the city of Mecca. Everything took place in Petra. Now, Ibn Hisham puts it this way. The Quraysh decided to rebuild the Kaaba when the apostle was 35 years of age. They were planning to roof it and feared to demolish it, for it was made of loose stones above a man's height, and they wanted to raise it and roof it, because men had stolen part of the treasure of the Kaaba, which used to be in a well in the middle of it. So, let's first consider the size of the Kaaba. In a book that's written here, it's called Akbar Mecca, or News About Mecca. It was written about Azraqi. He is an early writer of Islamic history. And Azraqi describes the early Kaaba and gives us measurements for the Kaaba that was rebuilt during the time of Muhammad, during his lifetime. On page 27, Azraqi tells us that it was made of rough stone laid dry, and the dimensions of the sides are listed as northeast 32 cubits, northwest 22 cubits, southwest 31 cubits, and southeast 20 cubits. So the proportions are roughly 3 to 2. We can calculate a cubit as 4.4572 meters, and so if we do that, the dimensions would have been 14.63 meters by 10.6 meters by 14 meters and by 9 meters and so forth. Now, here is the present-day Kaaba in Mecca. Notice that the early Kaaba was a different size than what Azraqi describes to us. Let's compare Azraqi's measurements. The top right is 14.63 meters, but that doesn't fit. It's too big. What about the bottom right? Azraqi says that side of the Kaaba is 9.1 meters. Again, it's too big. Well, the other side should be 14.17 meters, but again, whatever Azraqi is describing is bigger than the Kaaba in Mecca. Well, what about the top side? Azraqi said it should be 10.6 meters. Again, the Kaaba in Mecca is smaller. So notice that the Kaaba in Mecca is a totally different size. None of the measurements fit. Now, you would think that if the Kaaba in Mecca was built on the same foundation as the earlier Kaaba, it would be about the same size as the earlier one, but it is not. Now, what about the Kaaba in Petra? Let's check the measurements against that Kaaba. The top right, 14.63 meters. It's a good fit. The bottom right should be 10.6 meters. Again, a good fit. Azraqi tells us that the Kaaba on the bottom left side was 14.17 meters. Again, a good fit. And again, the final side should be 9.1 meters. And again, it fits. So check out this book, Akbar Mecca by Azraqi. And notice he's not describing a cube. He is describing something that is wider on the bottom and longer down one side than the other side. And what do we see in Petra? This exact same size and shape. So Azraqi is clearly describing the Kaaba in Petra long ago in his book, and he says this is the one that was rebuilt during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad. So here we have an early record of the Kaaba, and it's a very strong indicator that the Kaaba was here in Petra, known as Becca, also known as Al-Hijr, and we'll get into the names of Petra in a later video. Now, another early writer notes that houses and buildings of the city came so close to the Kaaba that later, when they wanted to enlarge it, houses had to be demolished. This fits the Petra Kaaba as the houses were pressed in close around it. Now, also notice that the Kaaba stands in one side of the walled area in Petra, not in the middle, as it does down in Mecca. This is significant, and it's noted by Azraqi on page 267. If the Kaaba in Petra is the true original Kaaba, then when was the Black Rock and the Kaaba moved down to Saudi Arabia? In my book, Early Islamic Qiblas, I come to the conclusion that the rock was moved in 65 AH after the Hijrah by Ibn Zubair. He took the rock to Mecca for safekeeping, and he built a new Kaaba there. In the new replacement Kaaba, he combined the Hijr wall, known as the Hatim, and he attached it to the Kaaba building. Al-Tabri, volume 20, 176, referring to the year 65 AH, he tells us that Abdullah ibn Zubair rebuilt, notice what he says, Bayt al-Haram, incorporating the Hijr within it. Where do we find that? In Saudi Arabia. What does he call it? Bayt al-Haram, not Masjid al-Haram. So, when was the Masjid built around it? I believe that happened a few years later. In the region of Huma, in Al-Namur, northwest of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, over 60 early Islamic inscriptions have been found. These include verses of the Quran, supplications asking for forgiveness, mercy, martyrdom, paradise, trust, belief in the Prophet Muhammad, and the sending of prayers and blessings upon him. Now, one inscription stands out, as it contains the full Shahada, and also mentions the building of Masjid al-Haram that year, and the inscription is clearly dated as 78 after the Hijrah, which would be in Western dating 697. The inscription is clear. It uses the word bena, or built. It also claims that it was the year 78 when Masjid al-Haram was constructed in Mecca. There can be no doubt which location it's speaking of, because Mecca is only a few miles away, where Petra is over 1,000 miles away. Now, I realize that this material is very hard for my Muslim friends to accept. They've been taught for centuries that the only Kaaba ever built existed in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. But now, using modern tools, we can see that the original Kaaba was in Petra. Indeed, the foundation of a structure remains there that looks very, very much like the early Kaaba. And the dimensions and the descriptions of the Kaaba in Petra all fit that Kaaba. If this is true, then the Petra Kaaba was the only Kaaba during the lifetime of the Prophet and the first 4 rightly guided caliphs. They would have all prayed towards Petra. On the other hand, the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia appears to be smaller. It's oriented slightly different from the Petra Kaaba, and the Hatem wall has been moved closer and attached, just as Al-Tabari tells us about Ibn Zubair's Kaaba. So it seems that the Kaaba in Petra is the original Kaaba, and the one in Mecca was made by Ibn Zubair when he rebelled against the caliphs. Now, along with this, as we mentioned, there's this inscription in Saudi Arabia stating that Masjid al-Haram was built in 78 AH. So it appears that the first original Kaaba was built in Petra, and the final Kaaba, built by the rebels, is in Saudi Arabia. Now, this creates a theological issue. From the dating of the mosques and all the different mosque construction, we can see that the Prophet Muhammad and the first four rightly guided caliphs all prayed towards Petra. It would seem that those who want to follow the commands of their prophet and who want to follow their book should pray towards the original Masjid al-Haram, which is in Petra. The later evolution of the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca had happened many years later after the Prophet had died. So how does this affect the merit gained by those praying towards the later Qibla? Does it count? Will their prayers be accepted by God? It's a theological question. But what about food that is killed facing the later Qibla? Is it still halal or is it not halal? And what about pilgrimage that is made to Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, the later Qibla? Do they count for anything, those pilgrimages? The question of the correct Qibla is not just an interesting sideline. It is at the very core of Islam. And I'm concerned for my Muslim friends. What does this mean for them? I think the archaeology and the histories are very, very clear. What needs to be considered now are theological questions. What does all of this mean? In my next video, I will compare the names of Mecca with the names of Petra, and I will try to answer the question that viewers have sent to me. Why is Petra not mentioned in the Quran? Or is it? We'll find out in the next video. So if you want more information, please visit the website on the screen. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been another video in the series Archaeology and Islam. Thank you for joining me.